Well, welcome everyone today in this SDG Action Day workshop. We're really happy you're here. And well, we just said already that we're very happy to see such a diverse group of people. It's really great to have you all here. And well, I'll just start now with a general introduction on how we want to construct the workshop, as Jan still lets new people in. But yes, I think everyone has had various or multiple of these online sessions, so please mute yourself. And you can post your questions in the chat, and that's very important because we've had a discussion this morning and we've concluded that we want to keep this as inclusive and as engaging as possible, which means that we will not do the breakout sessions today, but we will have a discussion in the general session, which means that we will all share our presentations, but we want you to learn about rights of nature as much as we want you to learn about future generations. So what we've come up with is that we want to keep the room open and we are going to post the questions in the chat and we can have a discussion along the way. So, well, I've already written it down in the slide, but if you want to address Jan, for example, in regard to your question of future generations, you can write at Jan and post your question in the chat and we will discuss your question. Now, Jan, how many people are we at the moment? Are we
We're
already?
with 17 now. Oh. But I'm still allowing people to come in, yeah. But I think if you're ready, you can start.
Yes, I'll try to talk a little slowly so the people coming in can still join the conversation. But well, I'll introduce myself first. I think I know most of you, but my name is Jessica Den Outer. And together with Jan, I am one of the United Nations Harmony with Nature experts in regard to rights of nature. So, well, I joined the UN about 3 years ago, and last year I was recognized as an expert. And nowadays I'm mainly working on rights of nature, but also as a consultant. So in this presentation, I'll give you a short overview of what rights of nature is. And I think I thought for this presentation would be more fun to look at the concrete examples of how rights of nature has been implemented in society. And then we can open up the discussion on what you think of rights of nature and what do you think the future would be for such an initiative. So, well, this is the question I always like to start with. If companies and states can have legal rights, why wouldn't nature? I could talk about this topic for hours, but I think the main point here is that nature should have a different place in society. And there's a lot of research that can be done on this topic, but if you look back, you can really see that the development of the place of nature in society is one where nowadays nature is an object, it's property, it's regarded as property that can be exploited as long as you are basically the owner of that piece of nature. And well, before I continue with the presentation on rights of nature, I'd like to say a little disclaimer. I say nature in this regard because it's easier for my presentation to do so. But I do think that nature means us all, humans. We are one with nature. We ourselves are nature. So I would like to point that out in this regard. But for my presentation, I'll keep calling it nature because that makes it a little bit easier. Now, before we really dive into the topic of rights of nature, I want to take you through a little criticism on the Sustainable Development Goals, because I think the Sustainable Development Goals can indicate how nature has gained this place in society. And this was actually a research of mine into the Sustainable Development Goals in harmony with nature a while ago. Because as some of you might know, the 2030 Agenda, which enshrines the Sustainable Development Goals, subscribes that this whole vision of humanity should live in harmony with nature. But if we look back to the whole idea of sustainable development, we can see that the idea of development itself started to develop itself basically after the Second World War. And during that time, development was seen as a means of reducing poverty and social justice, and also, quite honestly, economic growth, because that's what we needed at that time after the world wars. So as development developed itself, at some point people realized that we cannot just look for economic growth. We cannot just exhaust natural resources, as people call them. I'd like to call them natural elements, but we cannot continue doing that without having regard for the environment. So that's when we came up with the idea of sustainable development. But what I find very interesting is that in the research I've done, there's an author called Barjani, and he says, isn't sustainable development contradictory in itself? Because sustainable, to sustain something, for something to regenerate itself, isn't that conflictory with the whole idea of development, which is, quite frankly, the whole idea of industrialization and the gross domestic product? So, well, I think sustainable development is an interesting topic, and we won't dive into that too much today, but I want you to think about what informs our relations nowadays. And I think that we have started off on the foot of development being economical, and that leads to a lot of questions. For example, is sustainable development really sustainable? Now, in my research, I have also argued that I think the Sustainable Development Goals present a weak form of sustainability, which means that the Sustainable Development Goals as they are today are very anthropocentric. We still have quite a lot of focus in the Sustainable Development Goals themselves on economic growth and the GDP as a parameter for Sustainable Development Goals. And I think in regard to the weak form of sustainability, I have a few examples of how this weak form of sustainability presents itself in the Sustainable Development Goals. So for example, we do not regard the planetary boundaries of the Earth. Those are not mentioned anywhere in the Sustainable Development Goals. The SDGs focus on national income and economic growth, and that's what I found interesting in the Addis Ababa Action Agenda for the implementation of the agenda, which notes that yes, we should preserve the planet for natural resources, but that still seems to indicate that there's a focus on sustainable use of those resources. And that's how I argue that, we still have this focus on using the nature and the environment for our own use, which is very anthropocentric in itself. Well, I have a few examples, but I think most interesting is also that we have a parameter for development, which is the gross domestic product, but we do not mention any parameters for sustainability, whilst those are increasingly available. For example, if you look at the Paris Agreement, we have a way of measuring sustainability in a way. Now, in this regard, I still think it's really good that the 2030 agenda mentioned that we all should live in harmony with nature. So as Jan and I and SeMUel as well are working towards is finding ways in which we can construct our societies and work towards living in harmony with nature. Now, I am very excited about sustainable development, so I won't make it any longer, but if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. But now we'll come to the rights of nature. And the General Assembly rightly noted that some countries have recognized rights of nature in the context of promoting sustainable development as a way to live in harmony with nature. And I think most of the people attending today have a basic knowledge, or some people have a very extensive knowledge on what rights of nature entails. But rights of nature is basically what it says it is. So it means that nature becomes a rights holder instead of being an object. And I have just shortly touched upon this concept already, but nature in our societies and most Western societies now are regarded under property law, which means that you can acquire nature and you are basically the owner of nature. But with rights of nature, we actually want to leave that whole thought and let nature be the owner of itself, if you know what I mean. So, well, rights of nature is a very interesting concept, because what are the rights exactly that nature gains when we recognize such rights? Well, those are the sort of basic intrinsic rights that, as we say, nature to exist, persist, maintain itself, and regenerate vital cycles and the evolutionary processes that are related in that regard. And in this way, by recognizing those rights, we recognize the intrinsic value of nature without the need of a human valuator, as we have seen in the past. And well, usually when I start this presentation, people always ask me, but what is nature? This is exactly the disclaimer I've just given. I mean, I believe personally that everything is nature, including us humans. But in regard to the rights of nature, what you will see is that earth systems are given rights. So for example, we have rivers that have been given rights, lakes increasingly nowadays, mountains, etc. So this could be differently interpreted in different countries as well, of course. So for example, we have a very specific example in New Zealand where a river has been recognized to have rights. So that means that there's an act entirely focused on that specific river. But very interestingly, we have also countries like Ecuador who recognize rights for Pachamama, Mother Earth. And of course, you might wonder, what is Mother Earth? But Ecuador has left it open for citizens to interpret the sentence and bring lawsuits on behalf of nature and to discuss, for example, whether sharks or jaguars, there's even a case about a bird, I think, but also wetlands and rivers as well. So that means that, you know, Ecuador has left it open to interpret what nature means. And I think this is very interesting. And well, honestly, from a legal perspective, I think the New Zealand example is a lot stronger because we have written down and we have really made it clear that this river specifically has rights instead of leaving it open for interpretation, which makes it also a lot more difficult, I honestly think. But this is the whole idea of rights of nature in a nutshell. And I thought it would be really nice for this presentation if I give you a few examples. So, well, looking at the time, I have to be a little bit quicker. But I think for the Dutchies amongst us, it's really interesting to talk about the Waddenzee. Well, the Waddenzee, as most of you Dutch people probably know, is a very beautiful site which has been recognized by the UNESCO as a World Heritage Site. And well, it's very unique in the sense that it plays a very important role for biodiversity and, well, nature in general, I suppose, in this area. And well, although it's been recognized as UNESCO World Heritage Site and the government always says that it's a very important nature park basically in the Netherlands, there are still threats from fishing, for example, but also all sorts of other industry that work there. And I believe that's one of the reasons why Jan, my colleague who will speak to you in a bit, has launched a sort of campaign on why the Waddenzee should have legal rights. And Jan has written a really interesting article in this regard. Jan, maybe you could post it in the chat, or if people want to read the article, I highly recommend you to read it. Where he argues that the Waddenzee should have rights for itself and it shouldn't be owned by anyone. Because at the moment, the Waddenzee and this whole area is basically owned by the government, by the Rijkswaterstaat and some other Staatsbosbeheer, some Dutch authorities. And we believe that nature shouldn't be owned by the government or other actors. Nature should be owned by itself. That's the reason why we believe that the Waddenzee should have legal rights. Now, a very short cap on what's happened in the past years. Jan has written this article. It was published in a famous Dutch paper. And after that, there was also a municipality of Northeast Friesland who ordered the Waddenzee to have special rights. But that was done by a municipality, and as I am aware now, in 2020, there hasn't been anything else that's been going on. In 2019, the government has set up an authority and another few authorities on the governance, basically, of the Waddenzee. But I think the problem with that is that it's still owned by the government, and it doesn't really think about the intrinsic values and the needs of nature as well. It's basically about governing what industries could do what in the Waddenzee area. And well, of course, we've got the COVID crisis now as well, and there hasn't been a lot of movement in this regard, I think, especially in the government in 2020. But that's where I want to ask you if you have any thoughts about how could we take this further? What do you think should be done? Because rights of nature, whilst it's a very legal concept, there's also a lot of philosophical thoughts behind it, which is that nature owns itself and it has intrinsic value, etc. So we could think of a different campaign as well to gain legal rights for the Waddenzee. So any thoughts, please post them in the chat. It would be great to have a discussion later on. But for now, I'll continue because I'm a little short on time. Well, the Waddenzee is a great example of what's happening here in the Netherlands and what area we think should gain legal rights. But there's been a lot of developments, especially nowadays. And I believe that's also due to the fact that there's a general awakening as such that we should have a different relationship with nature. And there's a few examples I wanted to point out to you, which is first of all, the Convention on Biological Diversity. This is an example of an international, well, treaty, but sort of organization that has also recognized rights of nature nowadays. Together with my colleagues, I have founded the Earth Advocacy Youth, a youth organization for the rights of nature. And we have worked together with Swedish partners in ensuring that the rights of nature would be enshrined in the post-2020 framework. And this was a huge win for us, you know, for international organizations and treaties to recognize that at least rights of nature could be a way to implement a society or to create a society in harmony with nature is a huge gain. And of course, there's a lot of national examples as well. So in Colombia, we have a lot of developments. We have the Amazon River, the Atrato River. Recently, the Supreme Court in Bangladesh upheld the decision of an earlier court for legal rights of a few rivers in Bangladesh. And increasingly, this whole concept is coming to the Netherlands as well. So, well, we have the Waddenzee, which we are still working on, but we also have Spain, where the rights of a lake were recognized not too long ago. Sweden is drafting a piece on rights of nature in its constitution. The Rhone River is, there's few campaigns that want to gain legal rights for this river. And recently, Femke has told us that the Seine River in Paris is also, the city of Paris is also looking into ways in which we could implement the rights of the rivers. And I think especially in regard to the rivers, there's a lot to be, there's a lot that's going on. So if you want to know more about the developments in regard to the rights of nature, I would encourage you to look at the Harmony with Nature report by the United Nations. I've written it in this slide, but I can post it in the chat after my presentation as well. And you'll find a lot more developments that are happening right now. But thank you very much. I am over my time, but I wanted to give you a short introduction on the rights of nature and the developments that are happening. And after the presentation of my colleagues, we will open up the floor and we can have a discussion on it. So thank you very much. And of course, now I will give the floor to my colleague, Jan.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jessica, for this this great and great introduction. Thank you, everybody, for joining. It's an honor to be here with you today on this SDG Action Day. I'm actually trying to get this publication in English into the chat. I don't know if I can. I don't seem to, but I'm saving the chat. Leave your details there, and I'll send it by email, so you'll have it for free. So now onwards to my presentation on the rights or the interests of future generations. Here we go, this should be working. So when I was thinking about today, I was also thinking about who am I, where am I from, and where am I going to? There's a beautiful I think it's an Israeli or Jewish story about a rabbi that walked towards the temple or to the church, and someone jumped from the bushes on his path, and he says, "Who are you?" where are you coming from and where are you going to? And this rabbi was scared and said, like, whoa, I'm a rabbi, I'm going to church, and where am I going? Well, that's a good question. But who are you? And then this guy said, well, I'm new here in the village. I'm a police officer. And then the rabbi said, that's amazing. What do they pay you? And he said, they pay me 1 shekel a day. And then the rabbi said, I'm going to pay you 2 shekels for every day that you jump out of this bush and confront me with, who are you? Where are you coming from? And where are you going to? I think it's a question we often need to ask ourselves and remind ourselves of. As Jessica also said, I'm like you all. I am nature, not because I think I am, but really I am. I carry 1.5 kilos of non-human nature with me. Without it, I die instantly. So I'm critically connected to nature, not just because I breathe, but because of the little animals that live in me, that digest the food, that keep me healthy. In fact, if we count the cells, because their cells are smaller, the Jan you're looking at right now is more non-human than human. So I'm more non-human nature than human nature. And this is a realization that I get sinking into my daily existence as well as a father, as a lawyer. Because I'm also, and I thank also SeMUel for getting me into this realization, I'm also Jan van de Venis, the son of Arend, the son of Jan, the son of Arend, the son of Jan, the son of Arend, the son of Jan Gerrits, the son of Gerrit Harms, the son of Hermanus Gerrits. So I found out 9 generations ago where I'm from. And this really, really instantly connects me to my children, Lucas and Celeste, and their children and other future generations. Because the further back I go, the more I'm connected to you all. We share more DNA, the further we get back in time. And on the other hand, the further we go into the future, the more our DNA will mingle. So we are actually more connected in the past and in the future. I'm also the acting ombudsperson for future generations in the Netherlands and a lawyer and a protector of nature. I'm the chair of a national park in the Netherlands. So I try to make all my life be around law, working for natural protection, for a better world for our children and their children. And the Sustainable Development Goals can actually really help. I'm not going to read this out loud, but in the Sustainable Development Goals, there's a clear connection with future generations. We are determined to protect the planet so that it can support the needs of the present and future generations. We will implement the agenda for the full benefit of all, for today's generations and future generations, and linking it to human rights and international law. The future of humanity and our planet lies in our hand. It also lies in the hands of today's younger generations, who will pass the torch to future generations. But unfortunately, at this time, we're not passing a torch. We are passing forest fires, a world that is on fire, that is warming up. We're destroying our planet while we are at it, and we're not even noticing it. We are consuming at such an amazing rate that we don't even know where our products come from and what we are doing by living this way. Most of us are using up to 4 or 5 planets while we live, and we only have one. We pollute the air of the sky, which is actually impacting the lungs and the brains of unborn children. And when I was born 46 years ago, we had 5 big wild animals. Only one of them is left today. Forest in Borneo, we are causing climate change to actually have a very big impact on our future generations. We live in the Netherlands. I'm in the Netherlands. If you look at this map, we won't be able to manage this in 80, 90. Vector-borne diseases. We are getting diseases that we never had here in the Netherlands because it's warming up, destroying coral reefs by acidification, by plastics, and by warming up the water. And in fact, World Economic Forum, which has always been a more business-driven forum, lists at 5 of the most long-term outlook risks for humanity: extreme weather, climate action, natural disaster, biodiversity loss, and human-made environmental disasters. So a few years ago, this would have been cyber attacks, potential terrorist attacks, etc. But World Economic Forum is seeing that the way we are living, we can go on. And I just want to give you one example on water. if you see this circle on our planet, we have more people living in this circle than outside of this circle on our planet. And if we look at water stress today, where do we find water stress on our planet? It's already growing in this circle. Extreme weather, less glacial melt from the Himalaya because a lot of the water is already gone. Extreme droughts, extreme rains. And this is the outlook for the future. So these countries will have an enormous impact on their water supplies, where also their groundwater supplies have also been drained in the past decades. It's impacting their lives, and it's impacting the lives of their future generations and our global future generations. Because if you look at the world's most conflicted areas, they're also on the map. They're already in water distress, and they will have even more water distress. So water will be at the core of the future's wars. So we often hear, we borrow the planet from our children. I think this is not enough. And not enough as a statement. Not if we act in our daily lives as we do today, as parasites actually eating up our planet. This graphic is drawn as a joke, but it's not much of a joke. Actually, our planet has humans and can't get rid of it. And I think we are now at the point of actually mostly eliminating ourselves, and that nature will recover afterward. But there's much to learn about and from indigenous people. Many of them have integrated a 7th generation principle, which is not just 7 generations in the future, but also 7 generations in the past, knowing where you come from. The Jaya people in Kazakhstan actually know the names of ancestors up until 7 generations in the past. The North American natives don't have an open theory on future generations. No, every big decision needs to relate to the welfare and well-being of the 7 generations to come. So this is not, will we negatively impact? No, will we positively impact? What do we benefit? Do we benefit our future generations? That's the guideline. And what does this mean for me? Well, actually, I already told you, I found out who my ancestors are. And I found out I have farm blood. All of them were farmers. It's in my DNA. Also, my surname from the Venis means I'm from the peatland. So my ancestors thought of that name. I'm from the land of Salahom, which is actually Salland, and then the part where the IJssel River ends into the Zuiderzee, which is now the IJsselmeer. And I can find more of my ancestors every year. I also found out that my ancestors, and this is why I put the picture in the top right corner, one of my ancestors could not sell his land because he did not have any papers. Due to a flood, so the sea would flood his land every year, giving him fertile land, but sometimes the flood would take everything, including the farm and all the papers. So he needed a witness, a neighbor testifying that this was actually his land. And I think as Dutch people, we don't have a children's fire where we sit around and we put every decision into that fire, but we can do more. And I will show you some examples of that. We can imagine ourselves connected to future generations. But as I said, I'm also a lawyer, and ethics, rules, tools, and access to court actually link us to future generations. There's so much more that we can do on it than we do today. For instance, on ethics, 100 years ago, our Supreme Court said, it's not just a tort when you violate a written law. It can also be an unwritten law, which was amazingly a new and a brand new thing. In 2015, in the climate case in the Netherlands, this was a first court decision. And later on, the Supreme Court confirmed the link with human rights and the environment. But we had a court that actually was brave enough to say that equity and fairness towards future generations are part of the duty of care of the Dutch state in relation to climate change. I, as a lawyer, say not just in relation to climate change. We should make sure it is in relation to anything we do. And as we see that ethics are becoming law, future generations are also more mentioned in law. They are mentioned in the Sustainable Development Goals, which is a rights-based approach document. And the monitoring is also human rights-based, also by human rights institutions. We see them mentioned in the Paris Climate Treaty, in constitutions. I will tell a little bit more of a test case of that in Norway. In Wales, where there's an act on the well-being of future generations with an independent commissioner who can safeguard this law, as has been done in the past and still is in Hungary, Israel, and Finland, where they have a parliamentarian committee for the future. several court cases, the network of institutions for future generations, and I'm very proud to be a part of a group of academics that are writing right now the Maastricht Principles on Human Rights and Future Generations, setting the guidelines for the future to acknowledge such rights and to actually start protecting, respecting, and fulfilling such rights in harmony with nature and in balance with the rights of nature. So as soon as you have those ethics and laws, you can also have rules to respect, and you can work with this. And this is actually an amazing game changer, because as soon as you have those laws and rules, businesses will automatically take this on them to change, because they have to do due diligence on finances, or when they, for instance, do an acquisition on another firm, so they buy another firm, they do very good due diligence. They are now also obliged to do so on human rights violations. So what if they in the future need to do this on the impact of future generations? What if we can create assessments on that? Then it will work automatically, or also voluntarily. What if every company would have an internal ombudsman for future generations? And the Lab for Future Generations, which I'm a part of, is proud to develop all sorts of tools and exercises to do actually that. To imagine and experience back to the future exercise. So we travel back to the past and into the future. Unfortunately, not time enough for that today. We have developed a toolbox for scientific approaches and research on impact on future generations. And we can introduce and help you or your organization with a future council or the future chair, the toekomststoel, as many people in the Netherlands will know it. And then access to courts. So if things really go wrong, you need to be able to go to court. And UNEP, the environmental program of the United Nations, and academics have actually seen a big rise in the court cases. And I also always say why. It's because there's growing pressure on our basic needs, our basic fundamental rights, and those of future generations. Clean air, water, food, land. It's all in the Maslow pyramid. It's not about development anymore. It's not about freedom of speech anymore. It's our daily right to live. And also the human rights have been under a major amount of development recently. In the UN system, the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights, the Special Rapporteur, they are also including wording on the rights of future generations, linking environmental issues and harmony with nature to human rights issues. And many of those new cases will be about the rights of future generations, and many already have. The Dutch right above climate case has been. The Klimaatseeniorinnen in Switzerland, that case has been. These are all grandmothers who are saying we're standing up for our air that is being polluted, for the fact that we have less clean air to breathe, and which is impacting us more as old women than young people. But while we do this for our children and grandchildren. And we see more cases. We see more cases are one. And very briefly, because I'm also running out of time, the first case to do so was Tony Oposo, a good friend of mine as well. And in 1993, he actually said, he was a young lawyer, and he said to his friends, we have to protect our ancient forests in the Philippines. But there was no one that would take the case to court. And he said, can I then represent my children and your children and go to court on behalf of their right to sue for their and succeeding generations, because every generation has a responsibility for the next one to preserve nature. And he won. And the Supreme Court confirmed in the Philippines that he could. This was the first one. The Dutch Agenda case also brought intergenerational equity and rights of future generations in it. There are amazing cases in the United States done by youth and children. The Our Children's Trust cases, and a beautiful verdict in one of them is that a judge said, I care about the polar bears and that they are going extinct, but I don't have jurisdiction on the North Pole. I really care about the people in Bangladesh, that they are losing land, that they are drowning, but I don't have jurisdiction in Bangladesh. But these young people from the state of, I think it was Minneapolis, who are here in my court today, I have jurisdiction on their case, and therefore I will summon, and this was going towards the ministry or the Department of Environmental Affairs to bring stricter rules on climate change. And a very new one, which is now going to the Supreme Court. Unfortunately, it has lost on the merits, but it has confirmed that there is legal standing on behalf of future generations in Norway, where children and youth are protesting against the government drilling for oil in the Arctic region, which is actually now opening up because or due to climate change. So it's under provision at the Supreme Court right now. But this is my hope, and this is what I always end with as a lawyer. This is my hope. First of all, youth is no longer taking it. They're going to the streets. We have Eleanor with us, and she's the mother of Lily. Lily is one of the first climate strikers with Greta Thunberg, and I'm so proud of their youth. Our youth is not silenced anymore. They see that this is going in the wrong way. But and also a very promising, it's not an idea, it's happening, is that indigenous principles, and SeMUel will talk a little bit more about that. Indigenous principles are finding their way into Western legal system. It is in fact the well-being of future generations, but it's also linking human rights and the rights of nature into living in harmony with nature, living within planetary boundaries. And SeMUel will probably explain this himself. There are no definitions of sustainability in their language because there is no unsustainable behavior. The rights of nature, I think for them is an idiotic thing. How can you give rights to something that's much bigger than you? But I guess we in Western society are just learning and are taking and changing our societies by doing it in the way that will actually change this. So I'm very happy to be on board. And I also love the answer that Kate Raworth gave on a tweet of mine, where she said, have a look at your grandchildren. And you know they need an economy and a world that is balanced with nature. And lawmakers should ensure that this moral imperative translates into a legally binding rules. And if future generations could ask for one thing, it would be to stay within those planetary boundaries. And Judge Veramantri, he was the vice president of the International Court of Justice, was one of the front runners on the rights of future generation. He said, we have by law, and this will be acknowledged in the future, an obligation to allow future generations to choose their present, their development, and their future. And right now we are limiting them in their freedom to do so. Is this so brand new? No, actually it's not. Every country has some examples. I love this example. We have in the Netherlands, we have Madurodam, which is like tiny the Netherlands, all these little buildings, like an open field museum. And they already in the 60s, I believe, introduced a youth city council so that it would represent future generations through children for a city of smiles. And if we look well at this picture, we see who the first mayor was. This was our former queen, Beatrix, who's now again a princess. She was the first mayor representing the future generations. And our Senate has one of the most beautiful ceilings in the world, and many people don't know. It shows many pictures of the trade that we've done worldwide, but in the center, the drawer, and many people say art will save the world, but the painter actually said, the window in the center shows a picture through which the children are looking down on their fathers. Back then it was still fathers. Thankfully, it's now more mothers than fathers, but they are looking down on the decisions that are taking and that are impacting their lives. And I hope this is an example, just like the book that Roman has wrote on being a good ancestor. And for me, this picture also shows a clear sky with fresh clouds and clean air to breathe. So the SDGs for me are implementing an agenda connected to each other and in harmony with nature for the benefit of all, for today's generations and for future generations. Thank you very much.
Well, Jan, that was great. I think I will share my screen now for SeMUel to start his presentation. And then perhaps after our presentations, we can address the questions. Is that a good idea? Yeah? Okay. So I will just share my screen now. SeMUel, please.
Yes, okay, thank you. Can everybody hear me? Can you hear me? Okay. Hey, Jan and Jessica, thank you very much for this invitation. I'm very glad, and it's a big honor to me to give you the perspective seen from the indigenous people, and especially the Alifuru people. And I will explain you a little bit about who we are. Maybe you can give the next slide, Jessica. Well, I'm SeMUel Sahureka. I'm the son of Herman Sahureka, and my mother's name is Wilhelmina Akihari. And just like John, I can go also back into the history, 7th generation, and even more than that. But this is another subject, so I will just leave it at this moment. Well, I'm originally from Maluku, and Maluku is a bunch of islands between the Philippines in the north and Australia in the south. Maluku was more well known in the history as the famous Spice Islands. And from the perspective of the Alifuru people, I will give you some how we live, uh, how we live, and how we are related to nature. So, Jessica, can you give me the next slide? Okay. Well, the relation between man and nature, seen from the perspective of indigenous people, I think there's a little bit misunderstanding when people said indigenous people live close to nature. I will rather say we live in the middle of nature, and it doesn't matter where we are. Are we in the middle of, for instance, here in Amsterdam, or in the forest of Amsterdam, or we are high up in the mountains? Nature is everywhere. Because why? Nature has no boundaries. No, nature has no end. Nature has also not a beginning. And a third one point is that everything is connected. It's something we always, or not always, but we experience that. It's our way of life to see and to feel that everything around us is connected. And to give you a little bit about the Alifuru people, I will give you a description, or will tell you more about it from three concepts: the Adat, Alam, and Sassi. Adat is our way of life. We follow the rhythm and the ordering of the creation. It is, we see it, we feel it. It is the, most of the time they also talk about the heartbeat of Mother Earth, but we also say we can also feel the heartbeat of Mother Nature. We can also feel the heartbeat of the trees, of the animals, of the plants. It is like a music all around us. And everything we do, every decision we make is always focused on the future, because we believe that everything is inextricably linked with everything. Everything you see around you is linked and connect with one another. So if we see to the Adat, the essence of Adat is to maintain relationship, because everything is connected. Everything is connected to one another. The point is that we are not connected, but we have to maintain relationships with everything around us. So the Adat is based on love, respect, and harmony. Can you give the next slide? Okay, this is a picture I like to show you so you can see what I tried to explain to you, that everything is connected. Even the smallest grain of sand here on earth is to us also connected with the largest and most distant star in the universe. So our way of life, the core of our Adat is the core of our existence. It is not a religion, it's a way of life, how we should stand in life. And there are three main principles to maintain our relationship. First is our relationship which we call Upulahatala, Tunai, or God, or the great creator. And the next relationship we have to maintain is the relationship with our fellow humans. And the third most important relationship is what I will more explain it, is with nature, our living environment. So we, the Alifuru people, see Maluku as a right which have given by God to us. It's a right, this right is anchored in our adat. So the Alifuru people felt that he is connected with his land, with the nature also around him. So that's why if we talk about our land, we also talk about Tanah Adat, or we talk about Negeri Adat or Anak-anak Adat. Anak-anak Adat means the children of the Adat. Negeri Adat, the village is from the Adat. The Tanah Adat is a land from the Adat. Adat means we are connected. We are always connected with first with God, second with our fellow human, and third with nature and with Mother Earth. So to us, we are connected to the universe as the universe is also connected to us. Seen from our life here on Earth, we are connected to the nature and to Mother Earth, but it is also that nature and Mother Earth is also connected to us as a human. So the next slide, please. Um, the Adat is our way of life. Alam, I can explain Alam from two perspectives, two point of views. That Alam means also the physical world, the world around us. But Alam means also the spiritual world, the world of the dimensions. And like I told you before, Tunai or God has entrusted not only Maluku to the Alifuru people, but God has also entrusted Mother Earth to mankind. And it's the word entrusted. God has entrusted Mother Earth to mankind. It's not given like a surprise, but God has entrusted Mother Earth to mankind. That means that we have to take care of Mother Earth. We can't do everything like Mother Earth is like a surprise. If we don't like it anymore, we just throw it away and waiting for another surprise. No, we have to take care of Mother Earth because Mother Earth is also taking care of us. So our adat is not based on written rules. Our adat is based on unwritten rules, which we call, you can better say, it's the spiritual laws or the universal laws, laws which is not been written. Laws it tells us if anything is wrong in nature, we have to take our responsibility. We have to take common action to keep in harmony with nature. And so the way we see our place here in nature is that we are connected with nature, the trees, the animals, the mountains, the rivers, we are connected with them. We can't see our position separated from the rivers, from the mountains. We are just one with nature. These are forms of life who was here before we have been here on earth. It has been here before we exist as a human. So this is a picture from the natives from America, and there is a lot of similarities in the way of life of the natives in America and the Alifuru people, because they also use their spiritual laws above the written laws. And the written laws and the spiritual laws, which we call the adat, is still being held by us in our homeland in Maluku, but also here in the Netherlands. Yes, Jessica? And how do we build our society? How can we build our society so we can live in harmony with nature? The most important role from the Alifuri people is that each village has its own village council. Each village council plays an important role in the way we live with nature. Any decision a council make is always focused to the future, always. And like Jan told before, that if we think about the next coming generation, we always think 7 generations ahead, but also 7 generations before us in the line of our ancestors. So if you see for each village, each clan, each family is represented by its family member to take position in the village council. And we also have our kewang. Our kewang are some kind of like forest keepers. And the role of the forest keeper is very important. So can you give the next slide, Jessica? Um, the sasi is a way of life which is incorporated in the adat and nature. Our relationship with nature must be based on harmony and always focus on the future. Just imagine if there is something wrong in nature. For instance, if there is a plant or animal is declining in number, then the kewang come to the head of the village and he asked the village council to come and they will discuss what is wrong in nature. For instance, if there is a plant or animal is declining, then the council of the village take a decision that there must be a sasi set upon the plant or animal. That means that the plant may not be picked or the animal may not be hunted for a while until the number of the plant or animal is normal again. Then the sasi will pull off and the people will are able to pick the plant or hunt on the animal. In other words, when the balance is disturbing, then the Alifuru people put a sasi on the nature. So at this moment, there is an example, one island in our in Maluku. It's called Nusa Laut, and they have declared a sasi on their island from 1997 until now. That means that they don't let any company or any university to come to their island to make an investigation whether there is gas or oil or any other material which they needed for their company. They don't allow the people to come to their islands. So if we see the essence of sasi, can you switch the former slide? Sorry. So the essence of sasi is we have watched over the future of the next coming generation. So we talk about the next coming generation. Please, if you talk about next coming generation, don't talk only about the generation here in the Western countries, but also in other parts of the world. The next slide, please. Here you see 3 young children on one of the islands in Tanimbar. They are make a statement on the, writing it on a wall, that they reject all logging activities on their island, and it is from 2012. And until now, the island of Tanimbar is still in danger because the oil company is trying to build an oil platform on one of their islands. So the future generation must talk about the future generation of the whole world. So the next slide, please. So you see here a group of people on the island of Ceram. The part of the islands where they live is put on fire because of the palm oil plantation, and the smoke of the fire is keeping the island of Enwon, which is 100 kilometers further away, for almost 3 days. They will have the smoke on their island for almost 3 days. So the next slide, please. So it's also one of our youngest people, and they also asked me several times, we protect our forest and nature against logging and mining companies, but who will protect us? So that's my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much,
so
SeMUel. Oh, Jessica, you, please. You're the host.
No, I was about to say the same thing. Thank you so much, SeMUel. And I think your story really reinforces the message that Jan and I are trying to convey as well. And yeah, I think I'm so touched by your story always. I think, Jan, did you want to say the same thing?
Yes, I've just said in the chat, I see some questions coming in. Maybe some questions for SeMUel can still be thought of or written down. I also had to catch up, but I see, I like the question by Roman, which I will address, maybe Jessica as well. Roman actually says, what if you would have 100 million euros? How could you divide it in funds between campaigning for the rights of nature or the rights of future people? And my answer would be, Roman, obviously I would not just spend that money easily. I would really sit down and think where I could spend it wisely. And I think I would do our exercise as well, to travel into the future and see where this money would actually be best spent. And then with reasoning and talking to people around me, I would focus on something. Because this exercise also teaches us the things we can remove in society that are now blocking the change. So I wouldn't just jump on one thing, but I think if you at any point get such an amount of money, call me, because I would love to spend it. Jessica, anything to add?
Yes, well, honestly, I haven't really had time to think about this question because I was sharing the presentation. But what I'm currently investigating in my work as a consultant for the rights of nature is that, yes, rights of nature is a legal concept, and ideally we would want governments and municipalities, for example, to enshrine rights of nature into the legal context. But what I am more thinking about recently is that there's more power to the people. There's power in the collective, which means that I think with rights of nature, for example, we should build public campaigns where the public is informed that this is the way nature is treated in law and in our society in general. And I think a lot of people have this knowledge already, but they don't know how to transform this to a way in which we can respect nature more and really ensure that nature's intrinsic value and rights therewith are recognized. So, well, just like Jan said, I think we're both lawyers, so we would think very deeply before we spend this money. But I think for example, would put it in public campaigns to really have the public and create a bottom-up movement. And this is what we're doing with the Earth Advocacy Youth as well, an organization I have co-founded.
Also a question by Dagmar, maybe for SeMUel. SeMUel, the question is, I wonder if every area of nature is represented in its own rights or for itself. Isn't the protection dispersed? So how can we protect nature as a universal system? I think this really fits in what you have also already said.
Yeah, yes, it's true. Everything is connected. Hello?
Yeah, we hear you.
Okay, everything is connected. So that's also, it is very important to see that if we know that everything is connected, you can't only protect one part of nature and left the other parts unprotected. So for instance, if you give rights to a river, and a river flows from the mountains, the water, and you only protect for instance, the Rhine in the Netherlands, and you don't protect the mountains for instance, in Switzerland, then the pollution of the mountains will come to the rivers on the lowlands in the Netherlands. So the protection must be worldwide. Protection of Mother Earth, we have to do it worldwide. We can't only protect one part of nature. So that's why we also, like you said before, we are part of the nature. We are living in the midst of nature. So if we protect one part, we must protect the whole part of nature. I hope I've answered the question.
Maybe if I can add a little bit to it, SeMUel. So before we are there, we now see this rise of rights of nature as well, which is a more legal approach. And we see all these different sorts of rights of nature. So some are constitutional, some are by lawyers, some are legal personhood. And I think they're all symptoms of something that needs to change, but none of them have the perfect solution. Actually, I was doing my TED talk on the Wadden, and then I said the Wadden owns itself. If you ask me right now, I actually think ownership is bullshit if you relate it to nature. So we as humans at some point should recognize that there are things we cannot own. That there, for instance, the planets, the air, the sky, the water, and integrate this into our laws. And this will probably happen slowly through all small sorts of initiatives until we have reached a certain amount where this has been done, and then we will realize this at a global level or not. Yeah.
I think step by step.
No, I was just going to add to Jan's comment, because Rights of Nature, as I've presented it, was a very short presentation, but there's a lot more to be said about it. And I think even amongst us Rights of Nature experts, there's still a lot of research and development in how we can properly implement this whole idea. And also building on what SeMUel said about the whole who represents nature and what is nature exactly. So I think there's a lot of challenges within Rights of Nature itself. But what I personally think is that Rights of Nature holds a symbolic value as well, besides the whole legal point of view, because Rights of Nature, seeing nature as equal to you in law, and this is very general, but forces you actually to look at nature differently and regard nature differently. Before you pollute a river, you have to think about the rights, and you need to take that into consideration, and you have to speak to the river before you actually do that. And I think that is what's most important about Rights of Nature, that you actually evaluate this whole balance with nature. And I think maybe at this point, if everyone's okay with that, I want to give the floor to Femke, because I want to give a realistic perspective on Rights of Nature as well. And I think Femke has something very interesting to add in that regard.
Thank you, Jessica. This is actually what I learned from two ladies from Latin America. So they gave me some realistic feedback of how they view the rights of nature. So we had the judgment of the Colombian Supreme Court about the Amazon River, granting it rights, and also saying that some of the indigenous people living in the territory would be the appropriate guardians for the river. I met then with a lady from Friends of the Earth Colombia, one of our colleagues, and she's senior activist and political scientist. She said, well, this is very nice, and it will give hopes to people who are hoping for a big shift in consciousness through the rights of nature as a tool to start to relate to nature as, you know, taking care of nature rather than extract. So she said that that's very lovely. Yeah, she was almost a bit cynical. It's very romantic, but what in truth happens in this country with the lacking rule of law and with the huge pressure on our ecosystems and the extractive industries, also financed, of course, by banks in the West, is that now these indigenous peoples are seen as spokesperson of the Amazon River, and they will be at the forefront of receiving the aggression from extractive mining industries, who will continue what they do, but then actually might kill more of these indigenous peoples because they have been appointed, so the responsibility has been pushed to them to protect the river. And that was quite grounding to hear that, because it came from someone who knows the reality very well of this country. It's her work, and she also goes to those territories. Also, I have another friend of mine, she's a political scientist from Ecuador, and she's also interested in the rights of nature, but she's also super grounded about we have the rights of nature in the constitution. However, the government just keeps on, you know, giving permission to the Chinese to mine our Amazon in order to get loans so we can make our our economic balance work again. And also she signaled the danger of becoming a little bit too romantic, also as Westerners, to think about, oh, look at the rights of nature and indigenous people, and not to lose ground with the geopolitical realities on the ground. And I thought it was quite ontnuchterend, how do you call it in English? Sobriety, to give sobriety to me also as someone who is part of this movement, but to say, hey, also, it is used by some indigenous people, obviously, for their political, strategic, interests to assert, to adopt the rights of nature language. So this is what she says also about the government. I've read, I'll round up now, but in a very good book called Wild Law and Practice by Michelle Maloney, it's a compendium from some years ago. There's a chapter about Bolivia. And it talks about how the rights of nature in Bolivia were also used to advance the idea of energy sovereignty. So they translated in the end that the rights of nature means that Bolivia can choose to mine or not the Andes because it's its own nature and it's entitled to it as national sovereignty. So it used the ideology of rights of nature to actually have very extractive results in the framework of political language. So that really is like, I think we really need to get the conversation going with political scientists and others who can give this sort of critical feedback. So thank you.
Thank you, Femke. Can I briefly respond to that? And then maybe we can do some more questions. And if Jessica wants to add as well, I think it's a very valid and very important point. And I think we've seen this before. We've also seen many African, many South American countries having a right to a healthy and clean environment in their constitution, actually meaning nothing because you could get a verdict up until the Supreme Court and you would actually be out there and you would be killed and the verdict would get lost in the files at the ministry and nothing would ever happen. But on the other hand, these principles and these laws are actually positively infecting our laws and our systems. Because if I see the speed up that has been made worldwide on the right to a healthy and clean environment, now actually at the UN level being called to integrate this. And so we must ensure that more Western society take this on and respect it over there as well. So I think it was very, very beautiful also what 2 weeks ago was said by Monique Wilms by WWF in relation to illegal logging in the rainforests of Paraguay and Brazil, and she said, this is actually what we are causing. So we should not look away. We are demanding this soy to be planted, to be harvested for our cows, for our cattle. So we are causing this fire. We are causing. So if we here cannot respect the rights of nature there, and we are pushing for indigenous people to be killed, I think this should become more of a problem of us as well. I think that's a very important shift that needs to be made. But a very important, criticism that you put there. Jessica, or SeMUel, would you like to add to that?
Yes, I think, SeMUel, I'll give you the floor now. I've spoken enough.
Well, I think right of nature, if I compare it with the Adat or the Sassi, the Alipuru people, I think it's a good start for the people here in the Western to regain their connection with the nature again. For us, the right of nature is something which is normal. We don't think about it anymore, you know? But for the people in the Western, I think it's a very good start to regain that connection with their land, with their rivers, with nature around them. So right of nature must be support here in the West. So it doesn't mean that I reject right of nature. I think right of nature can go together with Sassi, for instance, with our Adat. If we just respect, one must respect the way of life of the other. So if the people in the West respect our Adat, then we have to respect the right of nature here in the West. It can go the same path.
SeMUel, can you also, I saw a question by Dr. Manjeri and from Prabhakaran, which is relating to Sassi. Maybe you can also answer those. I think one is the Earth Overshoot Day was also a month late this year due to Corona and COVID. Do you think we should have a shutdown of sorts like that, maybe for a month each year? So I would say that would be a Sassi every year for a month. And then the other question is from Prabhakaran. Do all the villages near Maluku follow Sassi policy, or is this only normal in Maluku? If not, why not implement this policy in all of the villages to protect endangered species?
Well, to answer the last question, if there is a Sassi put on in a village, all the residents of the village will follow the Sassi. Everyone. So if other persons from other villages came to our village, they will also follow the Sassi. So that's why we are also trying to introduce Sassi not only in the other parts of Indonesia or Southeast Asia, but we like also to introduce Sassi worldwide. Why can't we do Sassi worldwide? For instance, stop logging or stop with mining companies for a month or for a day. And if you look at the lockdowns at this moment, it will, the air is getting better only because of the lockdown. So the lockdown is some kind of Sassi. But we must not forget that Sassi is something which comes from the people. It's not coming from the authorities above, but also only from the people. Then it will work.
Thank you, SeMUel. And I think, well, we could have discussions about this for hours long, and especially in regards to rights of nature and the whole idea of including future generations and indigenous perspectives. But I think we are over time already. Maybe it's a good idea if SeMUel, Jan, and I post our contact details in the chat. And you can always reach out to each of one of us individually and to continue this discussion. Right, Jan?
I fully agree. Yeah, I've seen a lot of email addresses which I will send the extra info to, and anyone, you know, through Facebook or Twitter or Insta, find us. We're very open, and DM us if you have any questions. Right, Jessica? I'll give the floor to you, Jessica, to end it up. But I really, really want to thank SeMUel for being with us. We so often forget the indigenous to be a part of us, and it's somehow we have forgotten. And maybe Roman's next book could be about retrieving or refining the indigenous Western. So I'm recovering the indigenous Dutch in me, and I'm becoming much more sustainable and humble as I do. Back to you, Jessica.
Thank you for the honor, Jan. But of course, first of all, I'd like to thank SeMUel and Jan for their super inspiring presentations. And it's so great to work with all of you, and some of my colleagues are in this call as well. And we have to remain critical. And I think that this webinar we had some really interesting questions. And I think it's good that we continue this conversation with each one of you to find ways in which we can create our society in harmony with nature, because I think we've kind of lost our way. But this seminar, for example, gives me hope, because there are so many people interested, and there are so many people that do I forgot the word, and realize that we have to redesign our society. So thank you all very much, and feel free to reach out to each one of us. Thank you.
Thank you.